Hello and welcome to another episode of The Scientist Hay Farmer. Today we're going to talk about buying a Haybine, doing a pre-purchase inspection on a Haybine. So let's get started. Today is my new Holland 488 that has been the topic of many videos. It's a beaut and it works really well. I love this machine except for when I got busted on me the other day in some too tall grass. So let's say you decide you want to buy a Haybine and you don't know a whole lot about them. Hopefully this video is going to help you out a little bit. Before you waste your time looking at anything, the very first thing you want to do is come check the condition of these rubber rollers. Replacing these things is extremely time intensive and expensive. It will cost as much or more than the Haybine you're buying if it needs new rollers. These rollers need to be in really good shape. Look at them to make sure they're not cracked, that there's not big chunks missing out of them. Otherwise, you're not going to get really good conditioning with these rollers, and that's probably the entire reason you're buying the mower in the first place. So, check these before you look at anything else. In fact, look at them in the pictures before you even make the trip. If they're bad, then you probably want to forget it. The next thing I like to do to give me an idea of how well the machine's been taken care of is just go and look at your U-joints, like this one. There's normally one in the PTO, but I have that removed. Come back here, see if they look like they've been freshly oiled, or if they're really dry. That gives you an indication the machine has not been well maintained. Come up here, flip open the guards, look at the conditions of the chains. Do they look dried out, or are they nice and oiled? I just oiled mine. I keep them pretty oiled regularly. Another inspection door right under here. Again, the same thing. Look at the chains. Do they look dry, or are they nice and oiled? You can come under here and then just check the condition of the chains, like are they loose? How well have they been maintained? Same for the belts. Go ahead and look at the condition of the belts. Make sure they're not all cracked and whatnot. If you have to replace this belt to the wobble box, I have a video on that, but it is extremely time intensive. You gotta do a lot of stuff for it. The next thing to check itself is probably, this is probably the second most important one next to the rollers, is the wobble box itself. You do not want excessive play in any of these bearings. And probably the best way to determine if your wobble box could be in bad shape or not is how well they have the cutter bar spaced. So you should be able to take this belt and move this belt by hand, rotate it just like I'm doing, and you should be able to rotate the cutter bar back and forth like that with relatively little effort by hand, just to show you what's going on there. Let's talk about why that's important. Now, normally the PTO, normally I would be able to spin that all around, but my PTO shaft is kind of tied up there, so it doesn't want to spin. If it were connected to my tractor, it free spins when the tractor's off, so I could just spin this thing. The next thing goes along with what we were just talking about. You want to look at your cutter bar, look at your knives. These clips or guards on the top, I have stub guards, so they're going to look a little different than a standard conventional guard will, which are the long pointy ones. These need to be just the right tension or pressure on the sickle sections or the knives themselves. If these are on there too tight, it'll cause the entire sickle bar to bind up because there's excessive pressure on there, which translates to excessive pressure on your wobble box. It'll blow that out. So as long as this cutter bar is nice and free, you can move it freely, that's a good sign for your wobble box. It means the previous owner has these adjusted well. Likewise, you do want to check the adjustment between the knife and the ledger surface of the bottom of the guard, there should be no gap there if it's adjusted properly, like you can see here. These are all nice and adjusted. You do not want a gap between the knife and that bottom surface there, because that is how you cut the grass. It cuts like scissor action. Now, if there is a gap there, not a big deal. It just means you've got some work to do. The next thing you want to do is come over here, check the condition of these rollers. They should roll smoothly. This one rolls smoothly. The sound you hear is just from it rubbing on the track here. So there's rollers all along here. You just want to make sure that they're all rolling smoothly if you can get to them. Come over to this side. Well, before I do that, make sure it has the push bar with it. This is a modified push bar I made because my last one got busted in heavy grass. And then you also want to make sure it has this crop separator in here. So what the push bar does is it pushes the grass down before it gets to the reel. Otherwise the reel can take the grass and wrap it around. The crop separator here separates the grass and pushes it inside so it doesn't get wrapped around the reel inside here. Two good things to have that should have come on it, but just make sure they have it if you're looking at one. Next, come over and open up this shield here. Just take a look. Again, make sure your chains look good in there. Make sure this belt looks okay and that nothing is amiss in there. Which all of this is pretty good, but that's because I maintain it a lot. The next part, I should come back to the cutter bar section, is to inspect this area right back here where the hay goes up and make sure that's not all rotted out. It's pretty common on haybines that have been well used, rode hard, put up wet, to not clean that off and then it gets all rusty. I clean that off after every time I use it. In fact, I blow this entire machine off after every time I use it, so there's never any old wet grass sitting anywhere. Moving around, you can check the condition of the springs and make sure they look okay. These are the header float springs. Just make sure they don't look broken or excessively rusty or something like that. The tires, it's nice to make sure the tires hold air if you got to take it home, or if you're roading it, which you probably are. And then come down here, look at the skid shoes, which are these shoes right here. They have different adjustments depending on which hole that bar goes through. That's one of the things that determines your cut height. Just make sure the skid shoes aren't all, or sometimes called skid plates. Just make sure they're not all rusted out and got big holes rusted in the bottom. Otherwise, you got to patch those up or buy new ones. That's quite costly. Finally, come over here, and you might ask to raise it up and down a few times. Make sure the hydraulic cylinder is working properly. This is just a standard 8-inch stroke hydraulic cylinder. There's nothing fancy to it. The last thing you could do is just go ahead and come under here. Just check it out to make sure nothing looks amiss to you. This shield that we're looking at right here, that raises or lowers to determine the width of your windrow when you're dropping the hay out the back. And as you can see, everything is nice and clean here too. You can tell if a person is taking good care of their equipment because it's cleaned out. Inside these tracks here and all along the back, you get grass completely stuffed in those after every mowing. Well, I climb under here and I blow it all out so it doesn't get in there and rust those parts out prematurely. These are the roller tensioners. You might try turning these to see if you can actually turn them to tension the rollers. On a lot of older machines, they might be rusted and completely seized up, which means you're not tensioning your rollers. Check out the reel. Make sure it has all its teeth. Those teeth, or these tines, can be a booger to replace because they slide onto these bars. You got to take the bar off to get there. I do believe you can rotate the reel. Make sure everything looks right, feels right. You can come over here and check the clearance. Make sure you don't got any bolts rubbing or anything like that. The reel checks out, feels fine. You don't hear any loud, excessive scraping from these bearings in this track over here. Well, that's about all I can think of for things to look for in a Haybine when you're buying it. Hopefully this was useful, and if you saw anything that I missed or you think is good additions, then please feel free to put those in the comments. I did this with the baler as well, and there's a lot of great comments that people put in on things I forgot to talk about or just slipped my mind. Anyway, that's a wrap for today. Thanks for watching. If you found this useful, then check out some more of my other stuff. Like and subscribe if that's your thing. Otherwise, I'll see you next time.